In this conversation, we're continuing the groundwork that we laid in a previous conversation related to innovation and adding in the complexities of our current economic climate as we think about the work that we do. So in this episode, we're addressing what's happening in business, what's happening in economic climate, and how we can help. But first off, let's paint the picture. So Nicole, I'm going to throw it to you to just share your perspective about how the work that we do is more necessary than it ever has been before.
The moment right now is pretty intense. I think most people would agree. We're in an economic pinch that's likely an economic crisis, and that is set in the fourth industrial revolution that many academics call it, where all of our sciences and technology have never been able to kill us before. And then, in the age of AI, where there's enormous amount of uncertainty and excitement, add in potential wars that are global, the climate crisis, the people of 2023 have a lot to worry about. And our anxiety is high. This is absolutely affecting our business systems. And so the question is, what do we do? And how do we navigate this? What we see that's happening is that really leaders don't know, or they're overly certain that they know how to solve for it.
Business leaders are really trying to stay in front of what they see coming down the road by pulling in a lot of resources. We know a lot of companies are experiencing mass layoffs, a lot of cutting of things, but this combination of the economic climate and then the deep rooted anxiety within employees, this combination is detrimental to all businesses if it's not addressed really intelligently. And because we haven't faced this before, this is why we're having this conversation, is to bring to light a new opportunity in human systems and human capital strategy. You and I have spoken about a metaphor in terms of high performers, using the perspective of a high performing athlete and what's necessary to sustain their performance.
It's just like the human body. The metaphor here is the human body, in order to not just survive, but perform at amazingly high levels, needs certain things. It needs sleep. It needs food, right? And it's also the quality of food matters. The quality of sleep matters. If you reduce the resources that you're giving bodies, their performance is going to drop. It's not logical or even possible to have the same expectations on a body in terms of performance when they're not given enough nutrients and when they're not given enough time to recalibrate, to heal, to restore itself in order to continue and sustain high level performance. So that's what we're seeing in companies, right? Is that now, we have this economic crisis and there's been a lot of layoffs and there's less money. What is now being required for the existing or the remaining employees is they're being given less, and yet the expectations are not just the same, but the expectations are greater than they were before. And not only that, is that if there's a refusal to deal with this reality, then you're going to create worse problems in the future and set up your company to have worse kinds of failure. We're here providing a solution for that. What do we do? What do we do when there's these kind of economic times, increased anxiety, there's reduced amount of resources? How do we actually get to a place where we can do more with less, which is, going to be the common phrase of the moment, right? Is that there's less people, less money, less everything, but we need to do more with it. How responsibly can we do that? How effectively can we do that? That's what we're trying to address.
Yeah, your star quarterback now has limited coaching staff, less equipment in the weight room, rationed food, less rest, and 3 less receivers on the field. And so they're required to do more with way less. And we have a solution for that, because it's not about giving them a lunch buffet. I'm trying to think of the equivalent of how corporations and how companies invest in retention programs and spend dollars. And I think this is the time to have the conversation about who we're actually speaking to, because there's many different approaches to solving this problem. And you've noted that it's not an obvious challenge to solve because it's not one that many leaders have solved before. And so we want to just be really clear that this conversation isn't geared towards the leader who wants to check the box and assume everything's going to be fine, and that we have a people team leading a retention program and an engagement strategy, and we have some tools and some surveys in place, and we're checking in on people and doing town halls, because none of that, in our opinion, cuts to the core of what individuals need in terms of support to grow and develop, of course, but also to solve their anxieties, right? And so when they have this 300-pound linebacker charging at them and the pockets breaking down, what kind of defense do they have in that situation? That is an anxiety-provoking situation. And we're here to say that this conversation isn't for someone who just says, oh, just get them some more shoulder pads, like that's not what this is about. The conversation isn't to someone who's saying, oh, we've got all these programs, we've got all these people, we're on top of it. This conversation is for someone who agrees with what we're sharing, that this is a complex problem. And as leaders, we need to think about truly innovative, net new solutions to embrace and grow our people on a one-to-one basis. And that, in my experience, has not really been done on any significant level within a company I've worked for.
You can't substitute individual attention with algorithms or OKR software or any of these tools that end up being programmatic or fixed or prescriptive. And the expectations around these tools now become yet another burden versus removing as many obstacles as possible and removing as much friction as possible is really only happens inside one-on-one attention, giving an individual the attention that they need. And we see this throughout human growth everywhere, from children to, all the way up to university to mentorship. There's no better way to help an individual or a group of people or even a business grow outside of attention. Very specific, focused investment of attention, and then intelligence in order to solve problems and remove friction. This is what we do. When we're inserted into companies, we are the new technology that helps this happen, and we're human technology.
We've talked about the ways that organizations are spending a lot of money based on retention strategies with the intention of people development. And we know the ROI of investing in individual experiences is significantly higher. And that's because there's a different way of thinking.
I've worked with several engineers this has happened with, where I don't know the particulars of their work, but as they're explaining and I'm helping them process the obstacles that they're coming against, I'm able to be a thought partner to them in ways that increase the quality of their processing and analytics for solving that problem. And if I can eliminate some of their obstacles and their bottlenecks, that has freed them up in a way where they have even so much as to be able to code a particular solution for themselves that then is applicable to other parts of the company, so that they are not only solving their own problem, but that in so doing, they're solving a company problem. There's very few problems that are solely based on the individual person. And that's contrary to what a lot of managers believe or leaders believe. They believe that a lot of these problems exist in the individual person, but come to find with greater investigation, that's actually not true. They're usually systemic problems, and no one person has the visibility in order to locate it with any accuracy what these obstacles and bottlenecks actually are, or these roadblocks are. So with some help, we can identify what they are and then solve them. And in so doing, as I said, it solves more than just the individual problems. It solves a company problem. We created a whole new role for you that not only solved your problem, but in a much greater way solved a company problem. So this happens over and over and over in our work, where we become a resource, like an intelligence resource that allows the company to evolve into increasingly greater efficiencies. And then it compounds with the more people that we're working with, because you can imagine if this is happening, multiple levels in the organization, and then never mind if it's happening inter-organizationally. So in all of the organizations, marketing and finance and blah, 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 you end up having an increasingly well-oiled machine, a lot less pain and a lot less friction. What has been your experience, Chelsea, in the typical HR solutions, the typical learning and development? What have you noticed that's not working? What have you noticed that maybe is, but not in the ways you'd expect?
When I think about what's costing companies more money than they realize and where there are actually opportunities to reinvest the money in much smarter ways, my insider perspective on running so many of these programs across different kinds of people programs and L&D is that there's a lot of a programmatic or a tools-based approach to acquiring software that will help people align on goals or aid communication as it relates to keeping projects moving forward with fewer resources. LinkedIn Learning is a great example of big bucks spent on huge contracts to sort of, again, check that box. And the intent there is really to invest in employees' learning and development, to give them access to expand their own knowledge. Where I think those are well-intentioned but fall short is that the burdens placed on employees don't allow them the freedom and flexibility to spend an extra 45 minutes a day learning something that's really hypothetical. I think about it as hypothetical because it's not contextualized within the business needs in terms of the language that the organization speaks, the culture, the true areas of opportunity they're up against that are based on their job and their team and the current climate, right? None of these courses are made within the existing economic climate that we're talking about. They're not courses designed to half of your team was just laid off. You're a leader. How do you save face for the organization when you're freaking out yourself, right? And so then I think the next layer to that is to have something we call bespoke baseline. And this is a nuanced, contextualized, but also still a slightly programmatic approach to giving team members a look into the future. So it could be a 15-minute course that's fully branded, has leaders from the organization speaking directly into it, and requires a very, very low barrier of entry for an employee to get just a little bit of baseline. It could be around company vision, what to do related to the existing circumstances of the week, the month, the day. These things don't take a long time to produce. And so you're able to respond very quickly. And so there's ability to stay slightly more proactive, though I would say it is still a reactionary model. And then the third element that I think really that's what we're here to talk about is this one-on-one individual opportunity to engage with the employee, not based on how their peers are feeling, based on how they're feeling, and to engage with them in the actual complexities of the job they're trying to do, the obstacles they're facing. And what I love about the work that you do and we do is that the way that it empowers the employee to solve their own problems becomes this exponential factor where now they're solving their own pains through this new way of thinking, but they're also removing those pains from many other people in the organization. And we're talking about like an hour-long one-on-one where now you've done multiple things. You've re-engaged the employee, you've empowered them. So now they're engaged in a way that's actually a productive way, adding value to the organization. Meanwhile, they're solving their own problems. So this creates retention as an outcome. Costs less, actually, but it's so malleable because it responds based on context and nuance that no program can give an individual.
A lot of people don't consider the different approaches, what works about them, where they fall short, and which ones are the most effective. And what we find is the most effective one is the one that you listed last, which is the one-on-ones, where we're addressing each individual contextually based on their individual strengths and weaknesses, based on their individual job, and based on all of their particular variables that are dependent on them and no other person. This is the most effective and powerful way that doesn't yet exist outside of like occasionally like executive coaching. But what we do is we do it expansively and regularly and in a way that is more than just coaching. It ends up being strategic and a lot of focus on decision intelligence learning, which has to happen one-on-one. So a different kind of analytics, different skills that are developed in terms of, like you mentioned, problem solving, creatively overcoming obstacles, learning different ways to analyze circumstances, learning how to engage political obstacles, not just organizational obstacles or logistical obstacles, being able to identify the bottlenecks that are less obvious, and then filling in the gaps for each individual's knowledge that they don't have access to. So we come in and we are able to inform them on things that they may not be aware of, other things that are happening. It's not just resources, but actual information that is relevant to their work and relevant to their goals, right? So all of these things come together in a way that doesn't yet exist in companies. There's no one typically historically that has a role. They're devoted to these things within the organization completely, like interorganizationally, where there's integration happening so that every individual is getting this kind of attention.
And we know that many star players are being nurtured by leaders, but leaders can't touch every team member. The work that we do all of a sudden allows neglected players who are sitting on the bench to become active in the game. And we know that organizations cannot afford the cost of having any players sitting on the bench. No program can actually understand for a unique individual what their specific bottlenecks are and the way that they're being held back by that. If you're interested in hearing more about the 3 pillars of our work, which includes leadership development, decision intelligence, and organizational development, we have full podcasts on those. But for today, we hope that the gist of the conversation is that we're really in this to unlock innovative new ways to approach human capital systems in order to meet the moment, which we know is a huge, huge burden of responsibility on these invested leaders who have very few resources. And a lot of that burden falls to their limited employees now that, maybe they've experienced layoffs. And so now is the time to think really, really smart about how you're using resources.
We want to offer something that is sustainable in meeting humans where they're at in comparison to these superficial tools that have been deployed in all of modern business that aren't working. And so we're bridging that gap in ways that we're finding to be not only evolutionary, but in some cases revolutionary. And so that's what we're here for. And I think into the immediate future, we will have this problem, and perhaps it will be compounding over the next few years. The invitation here is how do we get ahead of it? If it hasn't hit your company already, it likely will. And there's no downside to figuring out how to become more efficient and invest in more comprehensive ways into your human capital.
And I will add that it's a whole lot of fun too, because the work that we're doing is not just about meeting the company goal. It's actually transforming individuals, their human growth and their potential, which is absolutely underpinning so much of what we do. If you're interested in working with us, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on LinkedIn. The link is in our show notes, and give us a follow.